Yeah.
Elastic beanstalk is the
You
one that I
can't
always
guess
come
what
back
that's going to be.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 407 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the Game Dev Comedy Podcast, Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is March 16th, 20 Jubilee. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And I would also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep the podcast going. All right, Sam. Let's talk about last week. We revealed that you added plus one human to the inventory
Party
of the
size
world.
increase.
Okay.
Yeah, she's level 0 right now, though, so it's going to take some.
Yeah, she only really has put points into charisma, I think.
Basically,
Really no other no dexterity, no strength.
There's nothing else. Really.
Very low intellect right
it's
now.
actually it's such a long grind that she has to be carried by higher level character. Diana in this case doing all the carrying.
Yeah, the new player experience honestly is really kind of fucked up because like it really does just completely rely on veteran players sort of carrying the newbies, for like a really long time. I don't. They really need to look at that.
Well, this is kind of what
Lazy
what I'm
devs.
talking about, but yeah, lazy devs. It is a multiplayer game though, so I guess they did do that.
Yeah, it builds community. I guess
That's true.
But yeah, so the story of this past week. So one is that these sort of like occasional, these 2-hour feedings and then occasional cluster feedings, as they're called, which is where the baby basically finishes feeding and then it's like, actually, I would like another round, sort of within like 40 minutes, which seems insane.
sort of Hobbit style.
Yeah, we had first breakfast. Why not second breakfast? Sort of a thing. But then there's like 3 or 4 of them back to back. So Dinah's been crushing it on this whole like, because she's breastfeeding the baby, and so it's sort of like a constant, insane sort of a gig, right? If you had to go do something every 2 hours, and it took an hour to do it. That's basically where she's been at, right? We've got some reprieve because the baby's really good, and so every so often she'll conk. She's not sleeping for longer, 3-4 hours, stuff like that. But still, when they go through these growth spurts, then the baby will do this thing where it's like every hour, every 2 hours, Diana has to go feed this baby. And so it's just been like, it's kind of a wild rodeo. People always talk about the sleep deprivation effect of all this, right? Which is like, the major challenge is like mechanically, we got this down, right? Diana's flipping this baby around. Like we got the burping down. Just the whole thing is mechanically, we are doing the skills without too much trouble, right?
No, and you'd say like any little aspect of it isn't like a hard thing to do.
Exactly.
Sort of in and of itself.
The hard thing is the fact that you're doing it every 2 hours, right? It doesn't matter. It's just like, it doesn't really matter if you get really, really good. Well, I guess it actually matters a lot, but like,
It's sort of Sisyphean, right? It's like rolling the boulder up the hill. Like, doesn't matter how strong you are, you just have to keep doing that.
Exactly. So Dinah's are crushing all this, but there's a funny thing happened, which I'd seen in some videos and stuff, people on Reddit, baby cams and things like that, where last night, so Dinah had kind of like I would say, very light sleep yesterday. And so last night we're getting ready for bed. And my goal basically during all this is to make sure she's good and then always try to make it so that she can fall asleep really fast, right? So we hop into bed, we're chatting a little bit, and then she starts fading, which is great. She's all cuddled up. And then I hear her say, "Oh, I got you." And then she just starts giggling. And I was like, "What happened?" And she was like, "I thought the baby was on my chest." We're in a different room in the house. She thought the baby was on her and like went to go touch. I was like, "Oh, I got you." I like went to touch the baby and there's no baby. You know what I mean? It's like a phantom baby, like a phantom limb sort of a thing. And was like, oh, and then just was kind of giggling and then passed out. So that kind of that constancy of like how much this is happening, I think it's all just blurs together.
Yeah.
It's wild. It's totally wild. But it's been a lot of fun still. Baby's vibing, doing great. And Diana's killing the game on all the feeding stuff, which has been really nice to see. So the pyramid we got going on is basically my concern is Diana, and then making sure she's sleeping, make sure she's doing well mentally and all that stuff. And then her concern's the baby. And so we kind of do that, making sure all the stuff is balanced out and taken care of and stuff. So it seems like it's working pretty good so far.
Yeah, I mean, hearing you guys talk about this stuff, it really kind of like, it makes me think a lot about a lot of the things that we've, worked on in the context of trying to like bring DevOps into the studio and like trying to be more conscious about what it is that we're doing and why and how, and like what actually makes things hard versus what just seems to make things hard. Because the thing that's, I think, kind of interesting about it is that, like we were saying earlier, what you guys have, like what you have to do, if you just sort of encapsulate it as like a singular task, like a bunch of singular tasks, any one of those is like anybody can do that.
Oh yeah, change diapers.
That's easy.
Not hard. Put like clothing a baby.
Change a diaper. Yeah, anybody can change a diaper. Anybody can do this. Anybody can do that. Except if you have to do it all of the time, and also try to figure out how to balance that against your own needs and your own schedule, and hand off like the logistics of handing off between parents, right? And then suddenly it's like,
whoa, okay.
It reveals that it almost makes me think about like how in DevOps you talk about the idea of like waste, right? Where it's like handoffs and task switching and motion and like all and heroics. So like something went wrong and suddenly you got to drop everything and go take care of it, right? And it's like though that's the stuff that actually makes things really hard and exhausting. Yeah. It's not like the individual task itself in isolation, right? And so
it's the complexity of the context, right? Because that's all assuming even that like you're not also trying to balance having to go back to work right away, since we don't have guaranteed paid parental leave in the United States, right?
Right.
And that you aren't under a pile of debt you're trying to climb out from under, that you have parents who can help, and that you have a partner even.
Yeah, the whole thing is just bonkers.
Yeah, like as soon as you start adding in all those other layers of like just how difficult your context can be, then it gets pretty fucking wild. Because you're right, at root, like the actual tasks themselves. But I think that's true of like, it's true of like all tasks. Right. It's like,
exactly.
Yeah. Like every little detail, for the most part, like the stuff you got to do, like it's fine. The problem is that it all exists in the context of like a million other tasks, plus the stuff that's impacting your overall ability to do any of them.
Yeah. And even just something like, like Sam and I have been talking through a bunch of production management stuff earlier in the week. And it's even just things like, you may know, for example, that you have this big thing that you need to take care of next, but it's 3:30 p.m. and you're done working in like an hour and a half or something like that. You can't necessarily start a huge thing that's going to require tons of like context switching and setup and stuff. And so now now the nature of your work changes, and now you've got to go back into a backlog or something and start trying to find things you can do to still kind of like make sure you get some stuff taken care of before the end of the day, right? So now your work has shifted. It's no longer do X, it's figure out what X is, and that's now your job, and that takes a ton of mental energy, right?
Yeah,
decision making
like is just the most costly damn thing.
Yeah, so there's all this invisible work between the quote actual work, and the invisible work is oftentimes the actual hard part of like anything that you're doing.
It's all the context, right? And then like, so yesterday, so I'm running around taking care of all sorts of house stuff, and I go to drop some things in the mail. Just pop outside, and we just had a big snowplows came through, and the mailbox, can't find it. It's gone. Where the fuck mailbox go?
It is buried or literally gone.
It was 20 feet away from the post that it's on, because the snowplow, which happens apparently very commonly here, the snowplow clipped it. You could see like on the corner, just like probably caught like an inch of it. And a snowplow is huge and has a lot of inertia, so that mailbox just sort of got flung off like. And I was shocked because I haven't actually picked up a mail like a proper mailbox. I've never hefted just a mailbox because they're not usually unattached. That thing is fucking heavy. I didn't realize that it's a very dense contraption. It probably weighs like 30 pounds. I'm not even kidding. Like I picked this thing up and it's like a regular mailbox, and that was flung like 20 feet off this post, right? So it got really knocked.
It's probably, sort of thing. Yeah, I think the fun thing about those like giant inertia things, right, is that they always have that kind of effect. It's kind of like a breakdown in a physics engine, right, where like something clips and it goes flying off, right?
One thing goes flying.
Yeah, like really high inertia does that, where you see a train like it seems like it tapped something, right?
Yeah, and the thing goes
goes fucking flying like so much faster than it seems like it makes any sense, because
or that a train can hit a semi like a 160,000 pound semi that's parked on the train track, and the train just does not slow down at all. It's insane.
Yeah. So, it's like one of those things again that you're talking about, this context determining the actual challenge of the work or the string of work. And it's kind of the same thing, right? Where it's like, on a standard day now we sort of got we got good rhythms and stuff going on with the baby feeding. Dinah's doing well, kind of taking the naps and making sure she's doing good. Like we're managing the stuff. But then, you walk outside and the mailbox gets exploded off its post and you're like, okay,
It's just some other thing.
Yeah, you got, there's the bar for like how much slack you got. Basically, it sort of really tightens up. And Diana doesn't have any. And so that's where I'm trying to keep the things on level.
You're trying to be the slack master.
Yeah, that's why like trying to create, like as a person running a business, trying to create ever-present slack, right, for like the team. This is why it's so important, because no matter how well a system is running, the context that you're operating in is going to throw chaos into it. And if it can't handle being derailed periodically, right, because of the infusion of chaos, because everything is like, even if it's running perfectly smoothly, it's like what's his name, Chris Traeger, who's like, if I get one grain of sand,
my body's a microchip.
If I get one grain of sand in there, the whole thing disintegrates, and he just like completely falls apart when he gets a little sick, right? It's the same.
Think about that though, like because the incentive or the kind of the decision-making process that a lot of managers use actually biases in the complete opposite direction, right? It's like you want your people to always be at 100% capacity and quote like being productive, right?
Actually,
except then when
they want 110% capacity, so they can
And then once you deliver 110%, that becomes the new 100% because, once you exceed expectations, the expectations go up.
I just saw a thing about
and now you're just meeting them.
I just saw a thing about Meta planning another round of 10,000 layoffs for this year or something. Yeah. And it was there's all these, capitalist panic articles about how trying to get rid of work from home and all these kinds of things, And part of like what the announcement was that Mark Zuckerberg is saying that what they found was that people who they hired like during the pandemic, who like they kind of hired remotely and then worked remotely, right, were had a worse performance than people who were hired through like the in-person process pre-pandemic, right? And I'm like, you just see this
on a subjective scale.
No, my question is, what the fuck metrics are you using? Because like I've thought extensively about how to measure performance, right? For myself to figure out like, am I doing a good job, right?
And what you do is going to be in the same sort of general domain as like an engineer at Facebook, right? Like you're doing computer programming
and solving architectural problems, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And I've never seen any metric ever that when you like sit down and start thinking about it, doesn't just obviously result in a bad measurement that doesn't reflect reality at all.
It's just not. There's just too many pieces to be able to boil it down. And anytime you do manage to boil it down, so you talk about like velocity and sprints, people use velocity a lot. But that also, the idea of velocity is based on the size of the tasks that you're putting through the system too. Yeah. Right. So it's like if someone on your team's better at breaking tasks down into more pieces that are actually then each individual piece is moving through faster, then it looks like, because your measure is how many pieces are moving through, it looks like your velocity is higher when it's not in terms of actual delivered goods, right? It might be just equivalent to someone who just had a card in their little Kanban board or whatever and just worked on that for the whole week and then finishes it at the very end. But 1 versus 10.
It's not measurable.
Yeah.
It isn't.
Yeah, but the problem is then like if let's say you got 10 people who are all doing work, and just sort of by definition, like we're saying, it's nearly, if not completely, impossible to actually measure whether or not those people are doing a good job. Yeah. Right. Well, I think you can use heuristics and you can look at things at a higher level, but if you wanted to actually like get like a daily number of like how good of a job did Steve do today on a scale from 0 to 100, right? You're not going to be able to get it, right? And so as a result, then like middle managers, they still have people above them trying to measure their job, right? How good of a management job is this person doing? So then the incentive is on the middle manager to invent weird fucking ways that are proxies for performance, like how many minutes did you spend in your chair in front of your computer?
it's all
We're gonna put
substitution.
tracking stuff on your website.
Substitution heuristics, right? That's basically what it is. Which is like you can't answer the question that's being asked.
Yeah, so you just measure something else.
Yeah, but I think
entirely, and then that becomes your metric.
that's what's so tricky about this. Where like, because I think as a person who works directly with a person, say you work directly with two people, you do have a sense of who of those two people is more capable or more productive, right?
Yeah, because it's actually the team dynamic that reveals this like fuzzy metric of like how capable. Like
I think it can only be fuzzy,
you have to be working together. You're right, because people are so good at faking stuff, right? That in terms of like being able to make claims about what they're doing, especially in like a big corporate context, because that's the easiest way to move up, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have that direct working with, so people can see your work, right? And they know what it's like to actually work with you, and that's one of the things that you see. And all these, like the smarter people talking about this stuff are constantly warning that like the ways that these big companies use, especially like tech companies and stuff, to evaluate workers and get rid of them, basically guarantees that they're getting rid of the people who matter the most, which are like the team linchpins who everybody else depends on strongly enough that person spends a lot of their time basically like boosting
doing immeasurable things,
doing things that are not on record anywhere, right? Because it's all like interaction with other people and all this kind of stuff, right?
Or it's just people who have no interest in spending a bunch of time cheesing metrics, and they're just trying to actually do stuff.
Well, I think it's so interesting because like the reality is that a really good evaluation does not scale. You can't scale that to 10,000 people in terms of being like really knowing and then being able. There's no apples to apples, you know.
Well, I would say it also doesn't. It also, if you come up with a really good way to evaluate one person, even that evaluation doesn't scale forwards in time, right? Because what that person is capable of doing and what you need them to do changes over time. And whatever your KPI was, 3 months ago may no longer apply, right? Or maybe there's 3 new things that you need to start thinking about to evaluate whether that person's doing well. So like, but ultimately I think to me the metric should just be like, can you tell? As in like, if this person isn't around, can you tell? Right?
Well, can you necessarily, but can the team that they work with?
Can somebody tell, right? As in like, is it, if that person steps away for a while, will there be problems that are harder to solve? Will there be things that fall apart?
Well, and even that's stuff. Tricky, right? Because if you take that metric, then anybody whose job is to like make sure things stay stable and bulletproof and are not likely to fail and all that kind of stuff, right? They're basically constantly doing maintenance and anti-fragility work. Then you don't notice. I mean, the team might notice they're gone because like will depend on them for all kinds of stuff, right? But the sort of unit of like functional output might not notice. Maybe not even for a long time.
It's all about time scales. Yeah. Because like, for example, maybe a company just sacks its entire IT department, right? And they're like, we haven't had any security breaches. Our servers have been running fine.
This is the whole like
pulling Elon with Twitter.
It's like, listen, I took the first 3 pills in the Z-Pack antibiotic and I'm feeling better. So I'm going to stop.
The classic.
It's the same fucking thing.
Yeah. So that's another point there, which is like if you're obsessed with performance metrics, but then you actually have a team of people whose job it is to make sure things don't happen. Then, in theory, every single day there's an infinite number of things that didn't happen, right? And so you can't measure that. So that is true. Yeah. I think you would need to kind of take like different approaches depending on, is this a production team? Is this a maintenance team? Is this an R&D team? And even then, you can still only get very sort of fuzzy heuristics about whether or not that team is making good progress toward whatever it is that you want them to be doing.
I mean, mass layoffs are never going to. It's a blunt instrument, so it's never going to be done well. I don't know how. You can't super effectively scale knowledge about, like truly knowledge about who is really key for the operation to keep going, especially when it's run up against all the other people who are leaving too. There's like all those kind of mishmash.
Oh yeah, because you're going to dramatically change the context so much.
Yeah, you might make it so a lot of high performing people who you keep become low performing in some weird way because of some other structure.
Oh, you absolutely will. Well, because also they're not going to trust the company, right? Because like the biggest impact.
If a bunch of their friends just got fired, they're going to be like, "Well, fuck this."
I think the wild thing is like this is the first time for all these big tech companies that there've been this like successive rounds of these really big layoffs for like, Meta and Google and everybody, right? And one of the biggest things that does is because those companies, a lot of their focus on their employee retention is like, one is compensation, right? That's why pay is so high at those companies. But it's also supposed to be that like we take care of you. It's all about like the benefits and the vibe and like creating the system where it's like you come in here and like you can just count on like things are fine now as long as you are basically working and doing good stuff, right? But it's basically like we hired you because we think you're good, and so we're done with that now, right? And then as soon as you have these mass layoffs, and especially in the context of like the companies are doing fine, right? They just overhired in the first place. So they just had more people than they strictly needed, but not more people than they can afford, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so then when they like, oh, we need our investors to feel a little better about what's going on, so fire people, right? It's that now all of a sudden you have this fresh reminder because all of a sudden your buddy's gone, right?
You have a reminder that as a worker, you're in an investment vehicle for a rich person.
Yeah, and that you can be removed at any moment, right? Yeah. And so the impact on morale and on people, because like so much of as I think we can all attest, right? So much of delivering good work is on just morale.
Yeah,
because if you don't,
team function. It's team function.
It's all team function and personal function. And if you fuck with that to try to save a buck, right? Then
but this also kind of pairs with, we were talking a while back about advertising, right? Where and I was like, I don't think it's even a thing that matters, right? But we were talking about the idea of defensive advertising, which is like, if there is a billboard somewhere, and anybody can bid to put their stuff on there, and one of your competitors is going to do that, then you're going to think like, well, I don't know if like people seeing my billboard will actually like move my product. But at the same time, I want to make sure people don't know about my competitor. Mm-hmm. So I will buy space on this billboard, right? And companies do this all the time with advertising. It's this sort of defensive strategy. It's like it's not about spreading the message about your product. It's about just taking up as much space as you can so that other people can't get their message out, right?
Well, this is actually
what I think
also
is interesting is that
I remember. I think related to this is the idea that like when you go in and like go to the toothpaste section, like in a store, and there's like 1,000 kinds of toothpaste that actually, like you look at the ingredients, it's like the same brand, like the ingredients are the same. Nothing is different except maybe like super minor variations, right? Mm-hmm. But mostly it's just like different names and packaging. And the reason they do that is to to physically crowd out that space.
Just crowd it out.
Yeah. So that there's no choice.
Because it's not about selling toothpaste. It's about making sure nobody else can sell toothpaste. So what I think is kind of interesting about and potentially kind of short-sighted about these layoffs, which I think we did kind of talk a bit about like during the first rounds of like Twitter layoffs and stuff, is that there are some incredibly talented people at these tech companies, right? And it's weird to say like, okay, we've got 10,000 super smart engineers and tech people, but we don't really have a lot for them to do. Mm-hmm. Right. So we're just going to set them loose, just set them free into the wilderness. Right. And like any 10 of those people could get together and make the next big startup that just destroys your company. Yep. Right. And so it's like, even if you don't have anything for them to do, keep them hired. And if they happen to do something, then that's your thing. And that's cool. And if they don't do anything, then that's also okay, because at least they, didn't like wander off and crush you, right?
Well, there's some anecdotal stories that I've heard about part of Meta's overhiring recently seemed to be that because a lot of they hired a lot of people who like once they got into the company like had to fight to find work to do.
They didn't have anything to do.
There was just nothing for them to do. But that's like so it seemed like they were basically hiring just defensively to keep other people from getting these people, right?
Yeah.
But the problem with doing that is you take a whole bunch of smart people and then bore them to death, right? Is like, because you still have to then set them free. Actually,
it's expensive to do that because they don't want to do that, right? Yeah. And so you got to pay them a lot to like. You actually have to pay somebody who's like who's really pumped about like being a programmer or solving problems or whatever. Like you have to actually pay them a premium to get them to stop doing shit.
I think there was a sci-fi short stories I read where they were like, you don't like humans get bored. It's a huge problem on these interstellar trips and stuff. So like, do not leave a human like unattended at your spacecraft for longer than like a day, because they'll just start doing shit.
Yeah.
They'll like, start doing stuff.
Yeah, they'll start tinkering. They'll invent a religion. You know, something
careful.
dangerous will happen if you.
Something's going to happen.
Keep them entertained. Otherwise,
Yeah. But I think, here's the thing. Like a company doing this kind of defensive hiring thing it's worse for all of us, right? In the sense that like how many new, interesting, innovative things are we missing because companies paid a bunch of people to sit there and do nothing, right? We don't know. But at the same time, like it is the smart business move for those companies.
well, it's also on an individual level.
Yeah.
It's not worse for you necessarily individually. You know?
Yeah, because you got to have money to survive. You know,
If you get
So,
paid big Silicon Valley
I'm
engineer
saying at
bucks.
the macro level, at
for
the societal level. Yeah.
Well, it's the same rationale for like why if we had universal basic income, then like, and again, like you see like these stories of there's a few of these stories that I just can't get out of my brain. Like one of I think it was on AGT, America's Got Talent, where this person came out just like was so fucking good, right? Mm-hmm. And their whole lives they just like wanted to be a singer, but they couldn't because they were trapped under the trappings of capitalism and dealing with poverty, right? And so they were just like working miscellaneous jobs their whole lives. And they got up and they just sung so beautifully. And they're like, oh, this is like the show's going to change your life. You're finally going to get to live your dream. And I was like, the only reason we now get to hear this person sing, right, is because of this fucking random game show. Right?
Yeah.
And how many people, for the same thing that you're saying about like people that get trapped, like really smart people that companies hire just defensively against other companies, then don't even let them do anything, right? How much cool shit, could we?
Yeah.
Could we actually?
Well, yeah, that is true. That UBI, universal basic income argument about like on the one hand you say like how many amazing talented people will never get to develop their skills and share what they have with the world because they are working 4 jobs trying to just pay the rent for a single apartment, right?
Or they just like have to work wherever because they need health insurance because we also don't have nationalized health insurance.
Yeah, exactly. And then then the thing that pisses me off about that though is like about the opposing argument is people say, well, some people are going to get that universal basic income and then they're not going to do anything.
Yeah, I don't care.
Right. And it's like, I don't care. Fine. That's like, it's a cost benefit question, right? And like, what's the cost?
To the next piece, which is the Chat GPT-4 came out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're gonna be needing this UBI. Like
it's just gonna get real weird.
We've already needed this for a long time because the sheer amount of poverty and the sheer fuckery that we live under, right? With how our system works. And like it's already way past due to have like an actually good UBI system. But yeah, we're about to run headlong into this big
AI is gonna throw a real wrench in this whole thing.
So GPT-4 came out this past week, and I guess they have some pictures of like the kind of the total training set size for 3.5 versus 4. And it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know what the number is because it's so fucking huge.
I think it's like 100 times bigger or something.
And so the result of this is that the thing has gotten just way better, very spooky. It was too much better. In fact, like in a lot of different ways. And they're adding basically a bunch of additional functionality to it. And I think this to me is where things start getting really odd, because we talked about basically a lot of the challenges associated with, work being integration challenges, basically handling things that are coming in from either multiple sources or in different modes. And by modes, I mean like text, images, code, all that stuff. So one of the big ones then is like, how do you think about something like images in the context of like ChatGPT? Right. So with the ChatGPT-4, they've shown that they basically are able to, you can feed it an image and then ask it questions about the image in a way where it actually knows, I guess I'm going to use that word because who cares? It knows what is happening in the picture to a degree that it can tell you what's going to happen. So they had a picture of like something about to essentially hung above a board that was balanced. And so it was like, what's going to happen when that thing falls? And it tells you what's going to happen, which, it'll hit the board, the thing with the ball on the other end will fly up. So you got a different level of this happened very fast, which is what's kind of freaking me out, because this happened in November, I think, when they launched 3.5.
Well, so they had been developing ChatGPT 3 for like 2 or 3 years, and then they opened that to the public in November, And then 3.5 came out just like a couple months later. And now we're at ChatGPT, or we're at GPT-4.
Yeah, and 4 was
I don't know how long they've been developing for, but
publicly as the Bing bot was ChatGPT-4. But it wasn't open for anybody else to use until today. I don't know. Very recently.
Yeah, but also the Bing bot is a fine-tuned version of it, where it
uses GPT-4 in the hood.
Yeah, and it's been engineered to behave in certain ways and like use lots of emojis and
search for stuff,
be more like a person and then sort of get unhinged.
Literally, every company has now announced they're basically using ChatGPT or using GPT and OpenAI products in general to like enhance their services in some way or another. But like literally,
there's all kinds of things like companies are integrating it into their documentation for their services, right? So instead of like having to browse through things, you can just be like, how do I do this, right? And then it will use the documentation as training for its knowledge base, and it'll just explain stuff to you like a person would. So there's that, and then there's
actually
like
honestly what I'm most excited
about
for like the ability to use these AI tools is for me to not have to spend time being like, where the fuck is this information I'm looking for? That's been like, if you take like Amazon Web Services, which has, for anybody who's dove into that, they have literally like at this point 100+ different services, right? All with like some amount of overlap. Some of them can kind of interact with each other in interesting ways. They have these weird names. They're basically making a video game, right? And that's like they have to invent a name for every service that they come up with. And so if you look at the wall of services, you're like, oh fuck, what?
Yeah, and you can't really infer from their names
you absolutely
what they
cannot.
What does
like,
Elastic Beanstalk
the only one
do?
Yeah, Elastic Beanstalk is the one that I always
guess
come back
what that's going to be. Right? And so if you go in there and like, because it's like so much of what I end up spending my time doing, and not just for Amazon Web Services, but for like all the stuff that I do, is like knowing what I'm trying to accomplish, but not knowing how to use that thing to do it yet, and then digging through documentation without knowing without knowing how to look for the thing that I want, right? And if I could just ask something like, hey, which services do I need to string together to make like this happen, right? And it could just point me to all the right places and summarize that info and give me the names of things, right? Then all of a sudden, what would have taken me like a day of, exploring and navigating documentation and like trying stuff and being confused and whatever, just now takes a minute.
Yeah. In other words, you could build a mental model a lot faster than you usually
So
do,
much faster.
just because.
Yeah, because you don't have to stumble around in the dark, just like grasping at whatever you can see, even though none of it is actually relevant. So it's going to be nuts. And I have access to GPT-4. I played around with it and just kind of asked it some of the same things that I had asked ChatGPT, which was based on 3 or 3.5 in the past. And the level of nuance and detail and specificity was dramatically improved. Like, and I haven't done anything with it with code yet. But just as an example, I talked I wrote to ChatGPT 3 a while back. I was like, hey, here's an idea for like a novel. Give me what maybe like the first chapter would be. And it basically wrote it like a 5-paragraph essay, right? Where it even ended with like, in conclusion, this and this happened. And the person was super excited and they were hopeful for the future.
Like we were talking about in that podcast episode, the last we talked about this a lot, right? Is that it's something that the stronger the pattern is, the better these things are going to be at spitting that out. But also the more really pattern dense things are like magnets for AI, right? They're like they're going to be drawn towards like the 5-paragraph essay and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And so the problem is like if you say, hey, write the first chapter of a novel, then there's all kinds of nuanced stuff in there. Because first of all, you need some characters. You need dialogue. It can't just be like this happened, then this happened, then this happened, right? Like people should say things and like have personalities. And also, it's supposed to be open-ended because it's the first chapter. It's supposed to start opening up story threads, but not close them. And it's okay, which also means some kind of longer-term intent of like, ooh, this would be an interesting thing. Basically. Yeah, this would be an interesting thread to start. But of course, like the original didn't have that level of understanding or patterns, right? And so again, like what it would give you in the past was just a fully encapsulated like short story basically with no dialogue at all and just kind of like describing stuff that could happen, right? And that's not true anymore. You know, this newer one, like it can reason its way through that, and it can like open things up. And
I think you can give it, you can now feed it 25,000, or you can have it output 25,000 characters.
I think that's through the API. I don't know what the limit is on, because basically there's just two modes, right? There's the chat GPT, which is just the website with the text prompt. And then there's also the API on the back end, which you can use as a developer. And I believe that's the one where they've opened it up. They've expanded it to 25,000 words or something like that. Which in the past it was 4,000.
Yeah.
Because 4,000 was too few to do anything, honestly. But 25,000 might be.
It's quite a bit.
Have to start doing stuff.
So we have Butterscotch spring break coming up this weekend. So we got a 4-day weekend. So I'm going to be probably spending quite a bit of time playing around with this new thing.
If you want to come up with a project to try to like do,
I was thinking I'd start playing around with Unreal Engine this weekend.
Oh,
but I think I'm going to use GPT-4 to kind of hone my
learn it
process. Yeah. So
we'll see. Have they built in? Because I know that that GitHub Copilot, it's like Copilot itself as a product, is only available in a very tiny number of editors. It's like VS Code, I think NeoVim or something, like one of the just text ones, and then like maybe one or two others. So my bet is that it itself is not baked into like the Unreal editor.
Right.
But the Unreal editor might actually have, because do they have like a plugin ecosystem? You know, like they might have
all sorts of stuff going on,
like an OpenAI integration or something already available.
Yeah, because the Unreal editor, I believe, is just open source.
It is, yeah.
And so there's a pretty good chance that whatever you want to do with it,
yesterday I was doing GameMaker coding stuff, and I had to like, because of the way that like the GameMaker language works, to try to like do some of the stuff that I wanted to do to get like better like editor support and stuff. I needed to kind of just like do some pretty verbose fucking stuff, right? I needed to like have some pretty redundant code with a lot of docs, right, that describe stuff.
A lot of boilerplate
stuff. And so I just opened up VS Code to like edit the thing I needed to edit there. That was going to be like really redundant. And Copilot fucked up the first time because it was like, it gave me some JavaScripty stuff, right?
Right.
But then as soon as I had enough like boilerplate in here, and as soon as I like made it do the right thing a few times, then it was just like tab complete.
Copilot's like, oh, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, like it figured it out, right? So quickly. And so I have to imagine that if you can just get access to this fucking OpenAI stuff somehow, like as you're like exploring Unreal or something, that you ought to be able to just really rapidly just have it give you stuff that works, right?
That's what I think is funny about this. Is that by comparison, one of the things I was excited about this week is that Clip Studio 2.0 finally came out, and it has an alignment feature for the first time in
alignment, meaning like you take two things and you like center these
on each other, vertically or horizontally, or distribute them across space, you know, evenly. It's like, and it
only took 12 years.
Well, I've always felt weird about, because we've talked about this with regard to art, right? Which is like it's the case that you can use AI art generators to make stuff right now, right? And they're slowly closing in on the ability to maybe like make some sprite sheets or something like that, right? A couple of these ones, some people are working on ones that actually can make like a full kind of like a shitty 16-bit pixel art character turnaround.
We're going to have an AI that makes a shitty 16-bit pixel.
The focus is on making the whole last thing, though, rather than as being part of a workflow. Yeah, because
it's one of those things where I think one of the kind of fascinating bits of it has always been on the art side, the need to put down every stroke specifically when it comes to the particulars of a project, of a creature, or whatever. And like seeing the difference here in terms of like what you guys are starting to get because of this, like basically how something like ChatGPT or OpenAI fits so well the mode of work that you do, right? Where it is actually, Adam being able to just hit tab to like knock out a bunch of shit. It's like he doesn't have to type all this stuff, right?
Yeah, but the main reason it does it is because of that integration. Because like even if ChatGPT was pretty good at being like, oh, I could just like tell it, hey, I want some code that does X, And now I have to copy paste that code like between it and my actual like source, right? I wouldn't use it, even if it was like incredibly robust at doing that.
Yeah, because you're just like tabbing back and forth.
Yeah, because I would hate the workflow so much that it just wouldn't be worth it to me, right? But the fact that it's built in, and actually like the main complaint that people have about even using the built-in Copilot stuff is that sometimes it gives you stuff that isn't what you want. And then that's kind of annoying, right? And or that it gives you like, which is like my main annoyance, is that it'll give you like an autocomplete that's like the first part is right and exactly what you want, but then it gives you like 10 additional lines of stuff you don't want, and you don't want to just hit tab because now it's like, oh, I gotta delete all this other shit, right? And so like those little things are just annoying enough, right? That it prevents people from using it. And so if you don't have a really nice integration with your workflow that like takes these things into account, gets better at that stuff over time, then it's mostly still like, you can still like find use cases, right? And especially if you're not used to having really robust workflows, then like, what's the difference between tabbing back and forth or whatever you're already doing, right? But I think that's what's missing for, it seems to be like just absolutely not on the radar yet for like art products, right?
Well, here's the thing though, is actually because the art community is in much more of a panic state existentially about this stuff, such that Clip Studio actually did announce, I think late last year, that they were going to have an AI tool. They showed it, an AI art tool baked in.
Oh.
Now, I don't know exactly what the sort of like really truthfully allowed you to do workflow wise, but like.
Yeah, was it generative or was it workflow focused?
I believe it was generative.
Sorry, I mean, is it like focused on like giving you a whole ass thing, or was it focused on helping you make the thing you're trying to make?
I believe it was based on, well, they're kind of the same because you use like in painting, out painting, all that stuff, right? Like once you can do generative stuff in the same way that once you can provide some, a chunk of GML code to have Copilot kind of start understanding what's happening. If you're like, fill this in over here, it can kind of take care. So, but there was a huge uproar and they shut it down, right?
Oh, that's short-sighted.
Because people are like, we don't want our art software to just make the art. That's why we're using the art.
Yeah,
software.
which is again like
true.
I get it. There's the existential stuff is very real, and the legal stuff. There's none of this is going to be in any way sorted out on any time scale that is appropriate given how fast we're hurtling toward all this stuff. But at the same time, it's like, I'm watching you guys get to just like, I don't know, tell ChatGPT some code, and it's like, here you go, buddy. And I'm like, hey,
I wouldn't worry about it though, Sam, because the way I see it is that if the existing art tools like Photoshop or Clip Studio or whatever, if they don't integrate this because they look at that as potentially alienating their existing customers,
you're just gonna get a new tool and like
there will be other tools that come out because there are people who are currently fully outside of the art ecosystem who are not currently artists who are like, I would love to be able to make art, but it's like Adam talking about getting into Amazon Web Services, right? It's like, where the fuck do I start? I can't just like, I know what I want to have, but I can't figure out how to get the lines down, right? So like there's way more of those people than there are artists.
Well, but I think the problem with that though is that that's not going to give you, like that's not going to give Sam what he wants, which was what Sam.
It will though in the end, because ultimately
it's going to take a few years before because actually the hard part of that is not like, oh, make an AI spit something out, right? No. The hard part is having it's like I always come back to VS Code because VS Code has been tuned by a team of developers over years to be such a delightful editing experience, right? As in like it has like so many hotkeys, it has all this stuff that does just like what I want it to do, right? As I'm like trying to work through building something so that it's truly assisting me create the thing that I want, right? Which is not the same thing as being like, I don't know what I'm doing. Give me some code that does what I want, right? That's a very different kind of a problem, right? And
for now.
No, I think it's fundamentally a different kind of a problem of like the person coming in either with expertise or without it. I don't think those are going to merge like into the same customer base, right? Or the same set of problems.
Well, you're just operating on different layers, right? Because I think about how, like, for example, in the Unreal Engine, there's that node-based system.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm saying is they're fundamentally different. Like you don't use the same products for like a person who's using a no code / low code way of interacting with the thing versus like actually in the guts of the code, right? You're trying to solve different problems there, and it's not to say that like
You're
those
not
won't have
describing
more.
a moral thing or a capacity.
Yeah, so I'd say
You can
those are
do
like
a lot of the same stuff.
yeah,
Oftentimes.
and like because if you can and want to build a whole ass game using like drag and drop, then that's awesome that you can and want to do that, right? But there's still a fundamental difference between like then using that versus being able to reach your hands into the guts of the thing for some other purpose, right? And over time, it'll become less and less sort of human time efficient to put your hands in the guts of things as like all these other tools get better. That's definitely true. But that sort of a thing where those are literally equivalent, like it just is better to like work with, I guess, an AI plus UI tools, and you can do anything you want to. So efficiently that's always better than like getting your hands in the guts like that. Because that's a UI UX problem. It's not just like, oh, can we have an AI that's able to generate stuff, you know?
Yeah, it remains an integration problem.
And so I think that's the problem with the art stuff is that unless the tools that already exist that are already really good for UI UX and like CSP and Photoshop that can do like truly amazing shit already, right? But also specific stuff that like solves a problem that you once solved, and that you now are an expert in like using that toolkit and solving problems in that way. If AI tools aren't used to assist in the workflows related to that, and what you're instead hoping for is like somebody new to come along, basically what they're going to have to come along and do is like they have to solve everything now using AI, because you no longer have like, again, it's like when I use ChatGPT to solve a code problem, it spits out code for me. I have to copy paste that code over into an editor, not only because otherwise it can't even run, but because I need to edit it. I need to use it in context of other stuff, right? And I'm sure as shit not going to use that input field as a text editor because it would be a garbage text editor, right?
Yeah, I think the basic point is that if we're talking about an image that you make, in like in this case for a video game, right? It's not the case that I would want to just have to be that I would actually I can create just a whole flat image in one go if I wanted to, right? So like draw a slugabun fully rendered, and it's just like one layer, right? You could do that, but it's not a good idea because it's not a flexible thing that you can edit. Changing the colors of it is extremely challenging. Messing with stuff is not possible. Slicing it apart for animation is like impossible. So in other words, to add
but again, this is all assuming that those are manual things, right? Because it could be that if you have a flat image of a slugabun, then a year from now, 2 years from now, you could have an AI where you say, hey, recolor this thing like this, slice this apart like this for animations, right? And you don't have to do any of that stuff yourself.
Oh no, yeah.
Right? But if you also can't, because that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
if you can't, if literally all you can do is tell the AI to do stuff and hope that it does close enough to what you want, that it's because sure, it can do all of these things, right? But like as it's learning how to do stuff better, and even honestly, it's the same as like if you ask somebody else to do something and they're an expert in it, right? Just because they can do a job and just because they can do it well doesn't mean that end result is exactly the thing you either want or need, depending on the rest of the context. Right? If you can't change it, then you're toast,
what you guys get out of the fact that its code is text is you basically get the lowest level sort of off the bat full modifiability of the thing, right? It's not like it's handing you an exe, which is actually more of what's happening on the image side. It's
a fully compiled image.
And so what I'm trying to say is that like what would be absolutely ridiculously good on the AI and art side for artists specifically, as far as these tool integrations, is something that actually gave you the damn layers, built it in the same way that a person builds it. Just like again, it doesn't give you an exe because you don't need to know anything about how this code works, or like doesn't give you like a weird script that you can't see inside of and modify. But it actually would give you the layers associated with that thing. Yeah. Because then you can really do stuff. And like structurally, again, like when it comes to integration, it's always the challenge. So the way I set up how to build a slugabun, for example, I can guarantee you it's different than how someone who's not using Spine or GameMaker sets up some 2D thing that they're putting into a Unity project. It's just going to be different. So if I'm just getting a flat image, the reality is like there's essentially metadata in that image when it comes to the game art side that you either have to recreate, right? Or somehow auto-generate in a way that then allows you to port it to the appropriate place. Unless you can somehow, again, like...
But it's I would think about this kind of like how, like when I started learning to code, it was 2010 and I was using GameMaker, right? And there was a lot of, as I started kind of like reading stuff from other game developers and reading like their blogs and, you know, like going to Gamma Sutra, which is now something else. I can't remember.
GameDeveloper.com.
GameDeveloper.com.
Which is more generic, but it's certainly a better name.
As I was going through that stuff, there was a lot of hand wringing about this idea that like Unity, Game Maker, like these new tools are coming out that arguably are just not flexible enough to make commercial level games, right? Like they have opinions about like the workflows and what the engine can and can't do and blah, blah, blah. And like, if you want to do something in your game that, you know, Game Maker fundamentally is incapable of doing, but you just learned how to use Game Maker, then you just can't do that thing, right? But ultimately, people just end up working within the constraints, right? They're just like, all right, fine, I guess I just won't do it that way, right? I'll just do something else, right? And so the thing is like the tools that are super accessible end up bringing so many more people in who then just learn how to do stuff that would be kind of surprising
just using
even within the limitations of the tool, right? And so when you're talking about like, you know, when you're putting together the Slugabun, like you need it in layers and you need to be able to slice it up into spine and blah, blah. And it's like all that stuff is true because we're using spine, because we're using Game Maker, because we're using Clip Studio. If, for example, Clip Studio had a thing where you could like give it a flat image with no layers, right? And then you could be like, generate like animation poses for this, like this, this, and this, and this. Then in theory, you wouldn't have to slice it up for spine. Or potentially like we could come up with other ways to use the fact that it can spit out those frames in like a second and a half. And that would be the new workflow. And then we would just make our game kind of based on what it's capable of, right?
Yeah. Well,
so there's a lot of interplay.
Yeah, but it's all about the workflow though. And in the end, it's all about the editability and user experience. And I agree, it doesn't actually matter how you edit. As in like if I had like an AI code editor and I wasn't allowed to code in it, like at all.
You cannot type at all.
I just had to then tell the AI to change stuff, right? If the AI was so good and the workflow was so good that like literally I could just like look at a line and be like, oh, fix that line. Or like, oh, that, like in the same way that I would like talking to somebody during a code review or something, right? If it was that reliable, but also that easy for me to edit through whatever the system was, right? Then yeah, that's a workflow I could figure out and get used to, right? Because the workflow is still good, right? And it's still like I can make the.
But you're still thinking about this from the perspective of somebody who has a workflow and knows how to code, right? And I'm saying there will be and probably already are fully published websites and Android apps and whatever that were made
basically.
They were made by someone who can't read us and maybe never even did a single line of code.
And I have no problem with that, right? Yeah. My point is that like in order for that to work, the tool has to be fully capable of doing literally everything so that you get what you want. And if there's a bug, you can describe to it what the bug is and it can fix it and like whatever. Like if the tool can do that, then sure, yeah, that's fine. Like that gives you what you want, right? To me, the problem with focusing purely on generative, give you the whole ass thing, problem solving in the AI space is that the vast majority of the time, even if the thing that can get created by these AI tools is like good, if it isn't exactly what you want, there isn't a good workflow for getting you there, right? So because ChatGPT is actually a perfectly good workflow for like prose based things, right? Where you can like tell it here's what I want. Oh, make this a little better, change the tone, change the whatever. And then you can like for a lot of common prose based stuff, you can end up with something just from talking to it that like you can basically copy paste and you're done, right? And if that's like what the workflow experience is for any given AI based thing, whatever the domain is, where you're basically just like iteratively working with the system with a workflow that's you basically giving instructions, right? And it doing a good job of converting those instructions into output, then yeah, that's the dream, right? But that's such a hard problem for so many kinds of spaces that if the focus is just that rather than integration of like assistance, like using it as part of a workflow, not as like, oh, generate this thing for me, right? I think
like you're both you're both correct. I think you're just talking about just a slightly different angle on it, which that's basically just saying like this is already possible because you shape the work. It's like we always talk about the shape of the work changes based on your constraints and what you have available in this.
Yeah, like if you've got this powerful tool that can do all these things and it doesn't quite give you exactly what you want, then you may just change what you want.
Yeah.
If you can change what you can.
Yeah.
But most of the time, you actually can't change what you want in any given, because the context that exists today, where you want to make things, do not exist in an AI world, right? So, like, you can't make a game today using OpenAI because OpenAI does not exist in the context of game engines or games just in general, right? You can use it to assist you in a really clumsy way, because it's not integrated into the workflow. That's my point, is that what we need first is good integration into workflows so that AI becomes the context, like everything is sort of like AI assisted. And that's the context in which you can truly actually now start to get purely generative stuff.
Programs. Yeah, because I think I did see some guy put together Snake in a web-based Snake game, only using AI, as he said. But he also used these two programs that I don't know anything about, like one to spin up this web server. Like he basically, again, this is what you're getting at, which is like you can't. There's no way to say, hey, make me an HTML5 game and deploy it
and have
so
it
that I can
exist.
play it.
Yeah, it's not.
You still have to do those other pieces. But someday
that'll be a whole ass thing. But that's my point, is that there's so many whole ass problems that are all so different from each other, actually, like deploying a whole ass website, making a video game and publishing it, right? Like writing a book and getting it into people's hands on their Kindle, right? There's like so many kinds of problems that I think where the real explosion of AI stuff is going to be, and we're already seeing it, right? Because that's what I said earlier. Like literally every fucking service out there now has just announced like, oh, we have AI tools now, right? And they're all going to be half-assed at first because they're trying to find a way to force like AI into their things, and they're not designed around AI being a thing that existed to push their tools, right?
Well, I actually think about it as there's an intermediate step. So like the first step that we're in right now is the one where like generative AI is starting to appear, but it's like you're saying, it's not really hooked into anything very well, right? And then the next question is, well, why do we need it to be hooked into things? And it's because things are still done by people, right? So like why does Clip Studio Paint exist? It's because Sam needs digital images for our game, right? It's not that like using Clip Studio Paint is Sam's job. His job is getting digital images created for the game, right? So ultimately, if Sam didn't have to ever touch Clip Studio Paint or Inkscape or whatever, and could just have the images, then that would be a better workflow, because there is no workflow. You just have it, right?
Well, the thing is, like, there is a workflow though. That's because like there's no universe at which you start from not having a thing and then have it, but didn't go through any steps of like.
I'm just trying to.
It's just like the actual art workflow as far as what you would consider it today, right?
Like clicking a trillion times with your mouse and like managing layers and like all that. So because the thing is, like, ultimately there's an end product you need, and so in the interim, there's going to be a lot of AI integration to basically help humans deal with the fact that our tools that we use for creating digital products are still incredibly labor intensive and manual, right? Like you're talking about all the boilerplate code you have to write, and like managing all the file structures and like doing a bunch of stuff with AWS to deploy or whatever, right? And like the only reason those services exist is to get some kind of digital output, right?
Yeah, you're saying.
And so
don't confuse
the tools in the middle don't have to exist, really, if you can get the digital output that you want from some other starting point. And so that's what I'm saying is
they do have to exist. They just don't have to exist in
the
current form or as things that are designed around human interaction.
Yes,
right. Because like every problem is too different. There's like. Because even if the tool is the AI, which is like this kind of god that can like deploy a physical server for you somehow, right?
Yeah, right.
Or several AIs, the kind of
handing off things, right? But in the end, like there's still a whole bunch of services that are handing information off between each other to actually get you that coming, and each one is tailored towards the very specific problem domain. Because like the world is full of infinitely slightly different kinds of problems that we're all trying to solve.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And I think in a way, it kind of reminds me of like people talking about students using ChatGPT to do their homework, right? And teachers are like, well, I don't know what to do because I'm assigning my students to write a book report and they just had ChatGPT do it and then they turned it in, right? And it's this weird thing where if your goal is to have a book report, and now there's this thing that can just make those, right?
It's the calculator problem again, but writ very large.
Then of course, like the value of being able to produce a book report drops dramatically because now you're just wasting time, right?
Well,
you got to reframe.
You think there's no value in like being able to.
Let me finish my sentence. Because you've got to reframe why it is that you're writing the book report, right? And it's like, if it's just to get the information on paper, that's a useless exercise because you can get that information written down by a robot who knows way more than you do about the topic, right? So if the exercise is one of using your brain to go and like gather information and analyze it and synthesize it, and the reason you're writing the book report is to engage with that, right? Then it's still worthwhile, right? But of course, like in the capitalist world of we need to make things and sell them, right? Then even though it will be way better for your brain and your learning to, in the case of art, like learn how to do the art and take the time to figure out colors and like how lines lay out and like develop your style
just
and
as a
stuff
person,
like that.
It's enjoyable to do things. Like, I think that's the thing.
That's why hobbies exist, right?
Yeah. But I think that's what's interesting. It's like it's fun to draw. It is like an AI being able
It's fun to do things that you're interested in.
Yeah. An AI being able to like fully render a thing that came out of your imagination. Like that's cool. That gives you the output, real quick. But yeah, it isn't drawing,
Yeah.
Like just a human
It's just
experience.
a different kind of thing. It's not even that it's because like using a tool that's able to like just do the work better, right, is a better way to get that output. It's not as you're saying, right? Like if you just need a 5-paragraph essay about this topic, or if you just need an art asset that satisfies these.
If what you need is the output.
If you just need the output. And this, I think this is one of my favorite book series is the Culture series. And in this universe, it's run basically by godlike AIs. Probably talked about this in some podcast episode long ago, but it's now more relevant than it used to be, right? But the universe is basically like the human universe is run by these godlike AIs, right? Called minds. And they're so vastly intelligent that they are just effectively gods. Like people's entire consciousnesses can be stored inside of these things in like a tiny blip that it can interact with. It can like talk to you in its own imagination, right? And like this is the universe we live in. And in this universe, it doesn't make any sense for people to solve problems or to do any work because the robots and the AIs are so vastly much more capable than people. Because again, they're just gods basically, right? That if you need something to get done, the god should do it. Right?
Yeah, because it'll happen instantly and for free.
Yeah, and way better than anything you could do, right?
And perfectly.
So in this sort of utopian universe where like nobody has to do anything actually, right? Then people have to figure out like, okay, well, my value is now not in like, can I do a thing better than anybody else, or can I even?
Your value isn't in being useful.
Yeah,
because
your value is actually just in finding ways to enjoy your own life. And they had these like scenes in the series where like a new ship is being assembled. It's being assembled like in the dock of this, world-sized AI. This thing has like 10 god AIs that manage it because it's so huge, right? And they're building this ship using all of these drones and stuff, right? But people are allowed to help. Right. and they just like they slow down the process. Right. But the God AIs don't care. They're just like, oh, people need stuff to do. Right. And
because the AIs are like, we're immortal. They're
literally immortal.
Do this thing.
It does not matter. And so people just get to enjoy the work. And they're like, oh, I can see. And they get to watch the ship fly off. And they get to say like, oh, like I put a piece of that in there. That's really cool. Even though they weren't needed, And if anything, they didn't help. It's like with your kids helping you with something, right? They're not really helping, right? Yeah. But it's that actually interaction where the value comes from.
When you're looking at a dog And I'm not saying that the age of AI will turn us into dogs. Just
It will,
very
in a sense. Yeah.
But yeah, well, the
I'd
question
love
is
to be
in
a
what
dog.
way. But I think when you look at dogs and like interact with them, you're never like trying to get your dog to do more.
You're never worried about the productivity levels of your dog.
You're enjoying the company of the dog, right? And
They're just pumped. They're fun to be around.
Yeah,
they're just doing stuff.
You're just trying to give
you know?
your pets a happy life. That's it.
yeah. And it's like as a new dad, I think this is also an interesting thing to touch on because it's like you forget that actually like the core part of being a person, the actual core part, not the like put some capitalism on it part, is just hanging out and helping out.
It's just being with people
existing.
and
Just being with people. And what's so weird
Vibing.
is like you get all
Entertaining
this stuff.
yourself.
Yeah, all the stuff that we do, I think oftentimes just entertain ourselves. Frankly, which probably spawns capitalism and then spawns AI on accident. Like all that stuff you could forget about. It clouds up the vision of like what are you? Like you're an ape, man or lady, or whatever. Like you're just a big ape. So do what big apes do, which is just hang out, enjoy your time with other apes, make tools. I don't know. Like it's just
put a stick into a termite mound and get yourself a snack.
But how uncomfortable of a concept has that become of basically, leisure time has been, sort of more or less destroyed, I think, in the U.S. Conceptually. You're supposed to turn it into a side hustle. So it's like, you being a person is not allowed in a very,
we've
Can't afford it. Yep.
Yeah, I read. I think it was probably a tweet or something the other day, but where somebody was musing about just the concept of cost of living, where it's kind of like we've invented this idea that basically being alive has a monthly cash subscription attached to it.
That's fucked
spread out across a large number of services between internet and utilities and food and waste disposal and rent, all that stuff, right? And all those things come together to create this cost of living. And that's your entry fee into like being able to stay alive, which of course, like you're saying that's a new thing. That's a new concept, really new actually. Like relative to the span of humans being around.
Yeah. So I think the thing is,
and it doesn't have to be like that.
We got so much of a sort of a civilizational cultural approach to this stuff that I think, depending on the culture you're in, I think the States is frankly one of the worst ones at it. The question of does it allow you to be a human in the most fundamental way that a human is a human, which is a big ape that interacts with other big apes and hangs out and tells stories and just kind of makes weird shit. Like, do you have any space to do that?
Well, there's a reason why people talk about like work-life balance, right? Because it's like life and work are perceived as oppositional forces that interfere with each other. Like just being a person and just kind of like doing life stuff is antithetical to the stuff that work demands of you, right? Yeah. And so you've got to try to balance them because otherwise, your work will take over. Yeah. My hope is that, over the next 5, 10, 20, whatever years, that a lot of these kinds of tech trends shake things up enough times that people are forced eventually to make some drastic changes to how we think about like what does it mean to be a person in the world, It's
already happening. Right? That's why everyone's tripping,
It's happening, but I think it's got to be a generational thing. Because of course people
I think it has to impact rich people is what has to happen because that's the only time anything actually changes. So we just have to hope that everything doesn't crumble and we don't destroy too many lives. I mean, we're already doing that, but hopefully before that accelerates too much, rich people get affected.
We can make some changes.
We can make some actual changes.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa Costa, for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.